I love action movies. The thrill of the chase, the likable yet empathetic protagonist trying to do what's right, going through hellish encounters and barely surviving due to their resilience and wit. And finally, when all the chips are down, that sweet callback to that seemingly insignificant detail set up previously that the audience surely overlooked, resulting in this satisfying climax that people will remember for years to come. On the surface, action movies can appear to be the middle child of the cinema siblings, often misunderstood, overlooked, and not given enough respect, especially when it comes to people discussing their favorite movies. Similarly, if you were to ask people who love action movies, what makes a great action set piece, more often than not, you'll get the same answer: the fight choreography, the background score, or who plays the role of the protagonist. And truth be told, all of these are technically right answers. But one of the most important things that people tend to overlook is what I like to call the geography of the set piece. That is, the location where it takes place, how it progresses, and where the characters are located at any given time. One last thing I need to talk about before I set sights on Cowboy Bebop, and that is perspective. More specifically, how it's used in drawing and illustration. Without getting into too much detail, I'm sure that you've seen images like these. This is an example of one-point perspective. Notice how all the lines converge at a single point. This point is called the vanishing point. This is an example of two-point perspective. As the name suggests, there are 2 points of convergence. Similarly, 3-point perspective with 3 points of convergence. Now, that being said, let's get into Cowboy Bebop, specifically the 2001 movie, and why it makes us, the audience, feel like a badass. Our hero emerges from darkness and into the light. This light is coming from the departmental store, setting up the location of the set piece. We are introduced to the bad guy. He's at the center of the screen, taking the majority of the space. Notice the lights on the ceiling. All of them converge on the character, making us focus on him and not on any of the background props. This is done so that we take the bad guy seriously. The store employee is looking up at the camera, with the shadow of the aggressor looming over her, establishing the power dynamic. Now that the basic premise has been set up, we move on to the background. Here, using one-point perspective, our eyes are guided to the robber in the red jacket. The Halloween pumpkins beside him cleverly foreshadow the last act of the movie, and the hostages at the back. The scene plays long enough for us to take a look around and notice the robber at the right as well. And just as things start to feel stretched out, that's when the gun goes off, brilliantly establishing Jet Black's location. Again, look at the use of perspective here. Our eyes automatically move to the window that the bullet went through. Notice how Jet is framed to the left, with negative space behind him, subliminally informing us that he is going to go screen right, into the dark alley, or take an indirect route, which later on he does take, bursting through the ceiling vent. Another brilliant use of one-point perspective. This shot organically takes our eyes from the hostages on the right, followed by the robbers, and all the way to the counter. And what do we get next? The shot of the counter. After a little bit of exposition by the bad guy, further fleshing out his character, our hero finally reaches the location. He's unfazed by the warning to stay away, and uses the classic distraction to sucker kick the guard outside. This pan to the right clearly signifies a shift in power dynamic. Again, the use of perspective makes us focus on Spike. And since we've already seen his deception tactic, we can correctly guess what's going to happen next. This shot of Spike using the environment to his advantage further proves that his cool and uncaring demeanor is an act he puts on to make his enemies underestimate him. One-point perspective at play again, making us focus on the robber in the red jacket, distracting us enough for Jet to burst through the vent and take down the other thug. With everyone taken care of, we get this false sense of security, only for the third henchman to reveal himself. He holds the old woman hostage, and now we have a classic standoff, represented by this shot with the help of two-point perspective. Our eyes go through this to and fro motion, bouncing between the robber and Spike, hence creating this tension. Here we are also introduced to another plot point. Spike, at least on the surface, doesn't care about bystanders. We'll get back to it later. Anyways, he defeats the bad guy, end of set piece 1. Moving on to the second set piece. Spike has to infiltrate the Cheerios medical building. He does so by stealing the tortoise cleaning truck. Unlike in the departmental store previously, here Spike has to gather the info himself, and we follow along. He disguises himself as a cleaner and gets caught by Elektra. Before their fight sequence starts, he mentions Elektra's red jacket, and after a few seconds of back and forth, he takes out a coin. Again, trying to use his smooth talking ways to get an advantage. He fails and the fight continues. However, after witnessing 2 armed guards approaching him, Spike decides to flee. He uses the environment to his advantage, but finds his passage blocked. He solves this problem by climbing over it, followed by this shot. By looking at the way it's framed, we subconsciously know Spike is going to jump, which he does, and then takes cover in the crowd to run out of the building. Here we have a callback to the cleaning truck from the beginning of the set piece. He gets on it, but before he can escape, Elektra has the gates closed. Spike is trapped. If I pause the video right here and ask you to take a guess what happens next, I'm pretty sure most of you will say he's going to climb on top of the truck and jump over the gate. Which again he does, by showing us Spike solving a problem previously, then presenting a similar problem again. Cowboy Bebop trains us to correctly guess what Spike is going to do next. This is a trick used by writers to make characters relatable, and in this case, since Spike is a badass, we kind of feel the same way as well. But what happens when Spike is out of his element, stuck at a place he can't use to his advantage? This is the part where we talk about the monorail sequence. Spike intercepts a call made to Elektra's cell phone about the location of Vincent. He's doing so with the help of a tracker he planted while fighting her. During my first time viewing it, I never questioned how the tracker got there in the first place. I just accepted it. However, going back to it, I realized Spike compliments Elektra's red jacket and presents a coin. So later on, when we find that the coin is inside Elektra's jacket, we can put 2 and 2 together. That being said, the tracker is discovered and destroyed. Spike has limited info and has to rush to the station. He barely makes it on time and shoots the window to get inside. Before proceeding, I'd like to point out one thing. As mentioned previously, this sequence takes place inside of a monorail. Unlike the departmental store and the office building, inside a coach of a train, you can only move forwards or backwards, but not sideways. So essentially, Spike is trapped inside a metal box. This fact is further emphasized by the framing and the use of one-point perspective. At the beginning, Spike is framed as the dominant character, reflecting his confident persona. All the lines converge on Vincent, again guiding our eyes to what's important. The next shot frames Spike similarly. We are looking up to him. Spike seems to be in control of the situation, and then, bang, the power dynamic changes. And for the first time in the movie, Spike saves a bystander. He understands that Vincent is unlike anyone else he's ever faced. He won't hesitate to pull the trigger and kill innocents just to achieve his goal. From here on out, the framing of the shots are flipped. We are looking up to Vincent. And just to emphasize the shifting of the power dynamic even further, the movie breaks the 180-degree rule. Earlier shots had Spike on the right and Vincent on the left, whereas now, Spike is on the left and Vincent is on the right. This is intentionally done to create a visual jerk, and in doing so causes the audience to feel a sense of unease. Fast forward a bit, Vincent shoots Elektra, and Spike engages in hand-to-hand combat with Vince. Unlike the previous set piece, there is no background music to ease the tension. In fact, it only kicks in when Vincent manages to surprise attack and overpower Spike. And instead of the usual energetic jazz-infused soundtrack that we are used to, we get this dark, menacing theme that clearly signifies that our hero has lost. However, this is not how the story ends. Spike recovers and realizes that he can't defeat Vincent alone. And towards the end, the entire team has to work together and save the day. That being said, we aren't here to discuss the plot in detail. Instead, how it makes us feel like a badass. Before I get to it, I have to talk a little bit about Scooby-Doo. Hear me out. As a child, I loved the show. but looking back made me realize something. Scooby-Doo made me feel smart. Every episode was about solving mysteries, and it was usually structured in such a way that you could easily figure out who was behind the mask, thereby actively engaging the viewer. And more often than not, when the veils were lifted, our guess turned out to be correct. This is a form of positive reinforcement that keeps us hooked to the very end. And it's this active engagement that makes Cowboy Bebop exciting. On a certain level, action as a genre can fulfill our power fantasy by showing us thrilling sequences and set pieces that we will never face in our real life. But if you can use clever storytelling devices such as framing of the shot, the use of short-term and long-term setups and payoff, and arranging them in such a way that the audience can correctly guess what the protagonist will do next, you can make the audience feel the same emotion that the characters on screen are feeling, creating a bond between the viewer and the said character. And if achieved, this can take a regular action movie or a set piece from being classified as cool to truly breathtaking. And in the case of Cowboy Bebop, you can make the audience feel like a badass. I made a conscious effort to talk about the movie instead of the show, because I truly believe that the movie is underrated. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the movie is perfect. In fact, far from it. It focuses too much on a single character. It has clear pacing issues, and it's longer than it needs to be. But even with all those flaws, whenever it gets things right, it does them exceptionally well. Take that wonderful scene between Spike and Elektra after they are captured and held captive. That's a fantastic way to develop characters. Maybe in the near future I'll make another video talking about the entire series in general, discussing the plot, the themes, the characters, and its overall impact on Hollywood in general. That being said, thank you very much for sticking around to the very end. It means a lot to me. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel if you want more videos like this. Goodbye for now.